Although I primarily play Terraria on the PC, with Journey's End coming out for consoles, it seemed like as good a time as any to wipe the slate clean and start a new build on a new map with a new character. I want to get into the spirit of things, and my recent poll showed that most of you on console are going to be starting from scratch. So I will too. Now, if you've played Terraria before, it might seem like the starting process remains unchanged, but Journey's End brings quite a few new mechanics that will affect how you should create your first base. I'm going to be talking about them while I get going with this new construction. And don't worry, as you'll soon see, they're not unpleasant or difficult. If you find this video helpful, please be sure to subscribe to this channel to support the creation of more videos in the future. And thanks as always to all who are already subscribers. Now, a lot of the attention with the Journey's End update is on things like Journey Mode, Master Mode, the new NPCs, etc. Those are all important and fun changes, and they might be easier to show in a quick promotional video, but it's actually the NPC Happiness system and the Pylon network that you should be thinking about when setting up your first base, because those are the new mechanics that will dictate the changes you need to be making this time around. So, how do the new Pylon network and NPC Happiness systems affect my miserable wooden NPC prisons, you might ask? Well, in a nutshell, with Journey's End, each NPC has a list of other NPCs that they either like or dislike. And similarly, each NPC also has preferences for biomes. They like some, but they dislike others. NPCs generally also don't like crowded bases with too many people. Can you see where this is going? That's right. You're not going to want one single monolithic megabase at the spawn point anymore. Your NPCs are more like us, fussy about this and that. Now, at first, this might seem like a hassle, but it's actually a really clever improvement, and one that's not hard at all to deal with. Other people have already figured out how to game this new system. Happy NPCs sell pylons, which are placeable items that link other pylons as a sort of teleportation network. And so with this Journey's End change, you can have bases spread all across the map, and they're going to be linked by these new pylons. Your days of having to wire teleporters halfway across the map for quick trips to the ocean or to the dungeon are over. As long as you plan your buildings to make happy NPCs, you'll find that moving around your world map has actually never been easier. Happy NPCs also sell items for cheaper. They buy your items for more gold and even have perks like reforging items for less gold, which is highly desirable, as you already know. If you've ever tried to reforge one of the endgame items, it's very expensive. But the most important feature of the happiness system is that you'll need to have a very happy NPC in a particular settlement in order to purchase your biome-specific pylon. So bear that in mind. Again, the system has been figured out. Don't worry about it. I'll talk about it later. And once the pylon for your particular biome has been placed, the NPCs at that location don't have to remain happy, so you can move them around as you see fit once the pylon is down. But you'll really need to butter them up initially to get that precious biome-specific pylon planted in the ground. With the happiness changes, you're going to end up, more than likely, with settlements in the starting forest, the desert biome, the snow biome, the jungle biome, the ocean biome, the caverns, and possibly more, like the glowing mushroom biome and the hollow. One benefit to all of this is that your NPCs in these settlements will provide a sanctuary against monster spawns. So it's not just your home base that will provide some much needed shelter against monsters. This new system opens up the map, not just in having more structures scattered throughout, but I would say psychologically as well, just having those bases everywhere. So, with the changes in Journey's End that I just mentioned, does this mean you should build a small base at the starting spawn point? Absolutely not. A lot of the same issues you faced before will still need to be addressed when you build. You'll still need lots of storage. Journey's End adds even more items, and there are already thousands to begin with. You'll still need space to fight when pesky event and invasion enemies teleport inside of your base. You'll need room for all of your crafting stations, and you're still going to be seeing a lot of this first base, so at least make it pleasant to look at. If you've ever explored the Terraria subreddit or seen fancy builds on YouTube or Twitter, you'll know that the materials and safety needed to craft these elaborate buildings simply aren't available when you're starting out. So what I would suggest is to use basic materials at first, but give it healthy dimensions. Don't build those small square huts. Try to plan for the future when you build, with the idea that you'll be replacing the basic ingredients of wood and stone materials as time and materials permit. One awesome change in Journey's End is the block swap mechanic. It used to be extremely laborious to go back and restyle your previous work because you'd have to destroy the old stuff before adding in the new, but that's not the case anymore. Simply place the new materials directly over the old and they'll be swapped out. So if you've got a wooden wall, just replace it. Stone block floor, replace it. It saves so much time, and it's an amazing addition to the game's mechanics when it comes to polishing your starter homes. It encourages improving your constructions later on. But you can probably see why you would still run into problems if you create too small of a starter base. What good is a fancy base if it's just a tiny box, right? So build that first base to a decent size, with a good footprint, and large rooms. You'll thank yourself later. You might be wondering just how many NPCs you should be housing in your initial settlement. Well, that's where everyone's playstyle will diverge. The guide and the merchant are still going to be your first arrivals, so definitely make room for those two. Where you go beyond that is up to you, but I'll give you my advice. Personally, I would recommend building out some space for more than those two. Not 10 more NPCs, of course, but room for a handful to get your little community of NPCs going. It's one thing to replace the design of the spawn point base over time, but do you really want to have to do that for all of your future settlements? Probably not. Which means you'll want rooms at home base, even if they're just temporary ones, for a few extra NPCs while you gather the items you want for that next base. And if you don't have that extra housing available, the NPCs won't decide to show up. If you go ahead and put some spots into your first base, you won't have to wait for those arrivals once your next settlement is built. Don't worry, those extra rooms at home base can always be turned into storage, crafting, or just decorative rooms. Which method do you prefer? A mad dash over to the next base as soon as possible, or building up a bit at the home base first? Also consider that earlier on you won't have the same maneuverability that you'll have later on down the line. Packing up and traveling out to a build site in, say, the snow biome is going to be a bit of an undertaking early on. So why not go ahead and reap the benefits of those extra NPCs right away while you gather materials? And their happiness really won't be much of a factor quite yet. And once they're in your first settlement, it's incredibly easy to reassign them to a new settlement. A few clicks and it's done. One idea is you can always just build cheap wooden boxes for those overflow NPCs that you know are going to be resettled soon. It'll make demolition easier in the future, and ugly FEMA housing will also encourage you not to procrastinate building that next base. Just don't fall into the trap of putting off the inevitable work of getting those other settlements set up. The more extra NPCs you settle in your first location, the more challenging it will be to repurpose their rooms once they're relocated. I know I haven't been specific as to who goes where. I'm going to include links to the Terraria Wiki's NPC Happiness Guide and to the Pylon Guide in the description below, so that you'll all have a reference to go off of. It'll be way easier to study the wiki than have me telling you the possible combinations of NPCs in each biome. Just remember that in order for an NPC to sell a pylon, they're going to need to be at 85% happiness or better, which is pretty steep. But this is a guide, as advertised, so I'm posting this image from a wiki entry to show you examples of who you can place where in order to get the pylon as a purchasable item. There are other combinations available as well, so if you don't have the NPCs shown above, check out the happiness guide linked in the description below to figure out an arrangement that will work with your current NPCs. I always enjoyed building my big bases in Terraria, but these Journey's End changes opened up the map. The changes encourage using varied and exotic materials to suit each biome. Take a look at this old base to just see how cumbersome a massive NPC settlement could become. Impressive in its scale, I suppose, but a little clunky looking, don't you think? Maybe you could even call it a monstrosity. Having played many hours with this base back in the day, it was very much a patchwork affair, and navigating through the base wasn't particularly easy. Could have been better. And certainly whenever an event enemy teleported into my base, it was a real pain to get over to them to fight them. So many doors and walls and floors, not an ideal arrangement. Now let's compare that last base to even just a modest biome-specific build from one of my newer worlds. The biome-appropriate materials and themes, I think, make for a much superior construction. It's hard to beat a cozy cabin with a fireplace and chimney in the snow biome, and it's obviously way easier to navigate through these NPC rooms. While it was nice to have all of my NPCs and stuff at my fingertips in a single base, with the new pylon and happiness system, it's really not that difficult to get from point A to point B if I need to. And honestly, so much more of the map feels alive now. It's a very clever change they made to the mechanics of the game, as I said earlier. So that's all you really need to know how to get started building under the Journey's End rule set. So good luck building your bases, fellow Terrarians. You'll find it is a worthwhile effort, and I encourage you to make that effort. And if you're still more of the tiny box NPC dungeon kind of player, well, I guess there's nothing stopping you from doing that, I suppose. Enjoy Journey's End, and thank you to all of you for watching.